Hello, and thank you for clicking on my video. Now, if you've seen the other videos in this series, you'll know by now that my name is Alex, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I live in, well, today, slightly rainy Tasmania off the coast of Australia. And today I'm sat on our lawn because that's quite important to the story you're going to hear. This is another story in my series set in Dinosaur Dell, which is the village inhabited completely by dinosaurs and other prehistoric reptiles. This is story number 9, the story of Brigadier Euoplocephalus and the Troublesome Termites, which isn't easy to say. Under the volcano. And not too far from the sulphur springs and the pits of tar. In the middle of a forest of tall tree ferns, you'll find some houses where the footpath turns. This is where I live. You can tell from the roars, my neighbours are all dinosaurs. I'm Alex the Alxosaurus. Hello. Now, once upon 70 million years ago... Wait. Which of the stories shall I tell about the dinosaurs living in Dinosaur Dell? The story of Brigadier Euoplocephalus and the Troublesome Termites. In a neat little house, just over here, lives a Euoplocephalus, the Brigadier, but since those words are rather big, most of us call him the Brig. As you will all too soon learn, the Brig is rather strict and stern. You'll very often hear him say, "Rules is rules, you must obey." You probably have a fair few rules in your homes and in your schools, but how many rules has the Brig's house got? 499, and that's a lot. In fact, the Brig has so many rules that if I were to start listing them all, this story would be at least 7 hours long. There was rule number 1, no task must ever be left undone. And rule number 2, you must only speak when spoken to. All the way through to rule number 433, never slurp your soup or tea. And rule number 444, no muddy paws on the bathroom floor. The Brig barks out rules just like these. But do you think he ever once says, please? Now, the poor dinosaur that had to listen to the Brig's rules more than anyone else was Mrs. Minmi, the Brig's housekeeper. As you can imagine, keeping house for the Brig wasn't easy. He had a very strict routine. Every morning he was up at 6 doing his exercises, and Mrs. Minmi had to make sure there was a cup of hot juniper tea waiting for him the moment he finished wheezing through his last push-up. Otherwise, he'd bellow, "Tea!" at the top of his lungs. Then she'd have to make sure his bath was run, and whilst he was splashing about, she'd have to make sure his hat was laid out for him, nicely brushed and polished. Otherwise, he'd bellow, "Hat!" And then she'd really have to scramble to make sure his Archaeopteryx eggs were ready when he came down to breakfast. Otherwise, he'd bellow, "Eggs!" and be in a terrible temper all day. And every Monday afternoon, Mrs. Minmi would have to stand and listen as the Brig did what he called his rule call, when he ran through all the rules, all 499 of them. Then he'd take a tour of the house to make sure that everything was spick and span, and if he ever found so much as a speck of dust, he'd bark, "Tidy my house, Mrs. Minmi." And even though he hadn't said please, Mrs. Minmi would rush off to find her Archaeopteryx feather duster. Poor Mrs. Minmi was rushed off all 4 of her feet looking after the brig, and as she swept and scrubbed and scoured and swabbed and soaped and straightened, the brig would sit and snooze. "Rules is rules," he would mumble to himself in his sleep. Now the thing the brig is most proud of, and about which he has the most rules, is his lovely lawn. You see, he lives just down from Tracy Triceratops and Stella Coelophysis. Tracy, as you probably know, has a garden full of fragrant flowers, whilst Stella's garden is a riot of colour, with a polka-dot parasol and a pretty picnic table. The brig's garden doesn't have any of that. Flowers? Can't stand the smelly things, he wheezes. A picnic table? Silly, he huffs. Garden's not for eating in. But a beautiful green lawn? That's the stuff, he says, full of pride. There was never so much as 1 blade of grass out of place. Well, never until that Monday morning. The brig had just finished the Archaeopteryx eggs Mrs. Minmi had brought him for breakfast. They had been poached to perfection, and his toast toasted to a T, but he still managed to complain about them. "More salt on the eggs next time, Mrs. Minmi, and the toast should be—" What the toast should be, Mrs. Minmi never found out, for the brig stopped mid-sentence. His beady eye had noticed that out on the lawn something was amiss. "Mrs. Minmi, what is this?" he bellowed crossly. Mrs. Minmi rushed in, wiping her claws on her apron, as she had been in the middle of washing up. That was rule number 97, you see. Never do dishes tomorrow that you can do today. But the brig didn't even notice. His face had gone quite red, which is quite an achievement for a dinosaur with green scales. Outside in the garden was an enormous mound of earth, almost 12 feet tall, right in the middle of the brig's lawn. The brig rushed out in a rage, followed by Mrs. Minmi. The mound of earth towered above them, and it was alive with hundreds, thousands, millions of little insects that ran busily to and fro in and out of tunnels on the mound. "Blasted beetles!" bellowed the brig.
"I don't think they're beetles, if you please, sir,"
said Mrs. Minmi in her quiet little voice. "What's that?" said the brig, who was a little deaf, probably from all of his own shouting.
"I said, I don't think they're beetles, if you please, sir,"
said Mrs. Minmi patiently. "I don't care what the blighters are called," said the brig angrily. "Blasted beetles, blinking bees, bloomin' bugs!"
"I think they're called termites, if you please, sir,"
said Mrs. Minmi.
"Well, Mrs. Minmi, I don't please," roared the brig. "I don't care if they're called Terry, Tony, Timothy and Tabitha. They don't belong here."
And he yelled at the termites.
"I don't like uninvited guests. Get off my lawn, you little pests. New rule, 500. Go away. And rules is rules, you must obey. I'll count to 5, then have no doubt. If you're not gone, I'll dig you out."
And he counted.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And do you think those termites flew away? Of course not. Would you, if someone yelled at you to leave your home like that? I should think not.
"Right!" bellowed the brig. "Fetch a spade, Mrs. Minmi, and dig the blighters out."
Mrs. Minmi shook her head, but went to get a spade. She didn't want to make the brig any angrier than he already was. And she did her best.
"Come on, look lively, hop to it, don't shuck,"
wheezed the brig. But try as she might, it didn't work. The termites just pushed up more earth, and if anything, the mound got bigger, not smaller.
"Blast!"
bellowed the brig. He was now scarlet in the face, and his hat was covered in earth, as was Mrs. Minmi's apron. He snatched the spade from Mrs. Minmi and shouted at the termites. "You naughty, uninvited guests! This is my lawn, you little pests! How many times do I have to say, rules is rules, you must obey? I'll count to 4,
then have no doubt, if you're not gone, I'll flood you out.
And he counted.
1, 2, 3, 4.
But the termites just carried on being termites. They had leaves they needed to chew up, and tunnels they had to build, and eggs they needed to care for, and baby termites to feed. It was a busy day for them.
Right, bellowed the brig. Fetch the hose, Mrs. Minmi, and flood the little blighters out.
Mrs. Minmi opened her mouth to say something, but thought better of it, and went to fetch the hose. The brig was angry enough, she thought. No point in making him even angrier. Well, she tried her best. She really did. But every time she stuck the hose into one of the holes in the mound, the termites blocked it up, and the water sprayed back at Mrs. Minmi and the brig. After 5 minutes, they were dripping wet.
Drat!
Roared the brig, spitting out a mouthful of muddy water. He stamped on the hose, cutting off the water. He was vermilion in the face now, which is not a healthy colour for anyone to be.
Mrs. Minmi, no one rests until these uninvited guests realise that this is my lawn here and leave with fleas in every ear.
Mrs. Minmi almost said that she wasn't sure that termites had ears, let alone fleas, but thought better of it.
Rules is rules. You must obey. I want you out of here today. I'll count to 3, then have no doubt. If you're not gone, I'll burn you out.
And he counted.
1, 2, 3.
But of course the termites just went about their termitey business.
Right, bellowed the brig. Fetch a match, Mrs. Minmi, and burn the beggars.
Well, Mrs. Minmi really wasn't sure about that. Playing with fire is a very bad idea, and you should never do it.
Now!
Shouted the brig, and she scuttled off and came back with a lit match. But the mound was so wet it wouldn't burn, and when she tried to push it into one of the tunnels in the mound, the breeze blew it back, and a spark landed on the brig's hat. It caught fire. Mrs. Minmi had to knock it to the ground and stamp it out. What a rage he was in now. The top of his head was singed with soot, but the rest of his face was quite puce. If you don't know what puce is, you should go and look it up. It's not a colour a face should be at all.
Rules is rules, and that's a rule. What do you take me for, a fool? I say this here is my lawn. You'll wish you'd none of you been born. I'll count to 2, then have no doubt. If you're not gone, I'll blow you out.
And he counted.
1, 2.
But nothing happened.
Blow, Mrs. Minmi! Blow the blighters out!
Cried the brig. And both he and Mrs. Minmi blew as hard as they could, trying to blow the termites off of their mound. But all that happened was the termites would flitter up in the air on their wings and settle on the other side of the mound. By this point, the brig was wheezing, and both he and Mrs. Minmi were well and truly out of puff. The brig's face had gone a very unpleasant colour that I'm not sure even has a name. If it does, I don't think I want to know it. And when he'd finally gotten his breath back, he spluttered,
How many times do I have to say, go away, go away, go away, go away? You will obey me, listen here. Rules is rules, so have no fear. I'll count to 1, then have no doubt. I'll blow you up if I can't blow you out. Mrs. Minmi, you must remember where the fireworks are from last November. Get them now, this has to work.
I think the brig has gone berserk. And then, the most extraordinary thing happened.
No,
said Mrs. Minmi, loud enough even for the brig to hear. The brig just stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish.
I won't fetch the fireworks,
said Mrs. Minmi.
You've been very rude to the poor termites. Perhaps they didn't know it was your lawn. They have to live somewhere.
Well, the brig was speechless.
I think, as a first rule, in cases like these, you should ask them nicely to leave and always say, please.
The brig was about to say something when he looked down at himself. What a mess! Covered in mud and water and soot. And his lawn. Almost every blade of grass was out of place amid puddles of muddy water. And it was Monday afternoon, and he had missed the Monday afternoon rule call. With an effort, he pulled himself together, cleared his throat, and said quite nicely to the termites,
Termites, well, it might be wise were I to apologise. There's one word to use at times like these. Would you leave my garden? Please.
And off they flew. Every termite took flight.
A termite will do anything if you're only polite.
And really, that's my story done. The Briggs house now has Rule 501.
You can keep all your rules, yes indeed, all of these, provided you always say, please.
And at the end of the story, I'm happy to say things changed in the Briggs house from that very day. He was always polite, wouldn't bellow or roar. He didn't shout orders out loud any more. To dear Mrs. Minmi, he was pleasant and kind. He said please and thank you and if you wouldn't mind. So I guess my story might just go to show that sometimes, just sometimes, it's all right to say no. Here's some more about my story. The Brigadier and Mrs. Minmi are armoured dinosaurs. Scientists call them thyreophorans, which comes from some ancient Greek words meaning carrying a shield. Some of them had spikes, like Stegosaurus, and others, like the ankylosaurs, had things called scutes or ossicles, bony plates, and osteoderms, which were bony lumps embedded in their skin. Euoplocephalus's name means well-armed head, and he certainly had one of those. Even his eyelids were armoured. If you struggle with spelling his name, don't worry. Scientists themselves have spelt his name wrong in 12 different ways in the books and papers they have published about him. As well as his armour, Euoplocephalus had an unusual nose. When you breathe in through your nose, the air goes straight into your lungs. When Euoplocephalus breathed in through his nose, the air had to go through passages that were like crazy straws, full of twists and turns. Scientists aren't sure if this helped to cool down his brain, or if it made him able to make deep booming sounds. Either way, it's no wonder the Brigadier is always wheezing. Minmi was a much smaller armoured dinosaur, and she lived in Australia about 119 million years ago. Her fossil was found near a place called Minmi Crossing. No one knows quite what Minmi means. In the local language, people sometimes use it for a type of lily flower, but it might also come from a word for a type of ghostly light that appears in the skies over the Australian deserts. Termites are insects that have been around for over 100 million years. They live in colonies, and each termite has a special job within the colony. There is also a queen who is responsible for laying all the eggs. Some termite queens can live for almost 50 years. That's the longest lifespan of any insect. Termite mounds are what are left behind when the termites burrow tunnels in the earth. In 2018, an extraordinary set of termite mounds was discovered in Brazil. There were 200 million mounds altogether. The tallest was 3 metres, that's 10 feet tall, and the oldest was 3,820 years old. The area of land they cover is as big as the whole of Great Britain. My pet termite. Brigadier Euoplocephalus might not like them, but this termite might make a very good pet. You'll need some things from a craft shop, so ask your grown-ups for help. Oh, and do remember to say please. You need a circle of styrofoam, which your grown-up might need to cut for you so it's a few centimetres thick, some thin coloured foam from a craft shop, red and yellow are the best colours for termites, some brown acrylic paint and a large paintbrush, several pipe cleaners, glue, 2 googly eyes and 2 paper fasteners. First of all, paint the styrofoam circle brown. This will be the termite's body. Ask your grown-up, please, to find something circular to trace around, smaller than the styrofoam circle, and cut it out of the thin red foam. Half of this circle will be your termite's head. Trace the styrofoam body onto the thin yellow foam and cut this circle in half for his wings. Ask your grown-up, and do say please again, to cut a slot into the side of the brown styrofoam body. Insert the red foam for the head and glue the googly eyes on. Ask your tame grown-up to cut 1 pipe cleaner in half to make the antennae and stick them into the foam below the head. Then cut up the other pipe cleaners to make legs and stick them into the foam body. Finally, use the paper fasteners to attach the wings to the body so they can open and shut. And there's your pet termite. I call mine Terry.
Well, thank you for joining me for a story from Dinosaur Dell. I hope that you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed writing it and telling it. Now, one day I'd obviously like to turn all of my Dinosaur Dell stories into storybooks that anyone can read at home, perhaps using some of the character drawings and photos of Tasmania that you saw on the screen while I was reading the story. I'd love to hear from you, so if you enjoyed the story, or you'd just like to say hello, or even better, tell me who your favourite dinosaur is, please let me know in the comments below, or do visit my website www.alexscottfairley.com, and hopefully I'll see you next time for another story from Dinosaur Dell. Bye for now.